The city of New York had surrendered to winter. Snow blanketed the sidewalks, muffling the chaos of Manhattan with a rare softness. It was a kind of cold that made strangers hurry, faces buried in scarves, boots crunching frozen puddles, and hands tucked deep into coat pockets. Holiday lights flickered along the edges of store windows, painting the streets in gold and crimson, but for many, the season brought more chill than cheer. On the corner of Madison Avenue and 42nd Street, nestled between a coffee shop and a florist that was closed to the season, stood an old-fashioned toy store, one of the last of its kind. Its window display was an enchanting world unto itself. Plush animals arranged like a marching band, soldiers standing guard beside a snow-dusted dollhouse, and at the center, a model train looping through a miniature winter village. The train's metallic rhythm clicked over the tracks endlessly, small puffs of vapor rising from its chimney, as if the engine were breathing life into the quiet display. A small boy stood pressed against a window. His forehead rested on the cold glass, his breath forming tiny clouds that faded as quickly as they came. He was thin, though bundled in a bulky second-hand coat that hung awkwardly on his frame. The sleeves were too long, the zipper crooked, and the hem stained from slush. His sneakers were mismatched and damp, with holes near the toes. But it was his eyes that told the true story, wide, brown, and impossibly tired for a child so young. Ethan was 9 years old. He had memorized the pattern of the toy train after only a few minutes, but he couldn't look away. It was not the train itself that gripped him, though its shiny red engine and glowing windows were mesmerizing. It was everything it represented. The village in the display was neat, peaceful, and lit with warm lights from inside miniature homes. There were no sirens there, no shouting, no cold. For 3 years now, Ethan had lived in a group home in the Bronx. He remembered little about the world before it. Just the soft smell of his father's coat, the hum of a lullaby, and the feel of a hand always ready to hold his, when his father had died in a car accident. Ethan's life had splintered into places that were temporary, people who came and went, and promises that were never kept. He had grown quiet in those years, not out of rebellion, but out of defense. Words were often used against him, so he chose silence. Safer that way. That afternoon, while other children tugged their parents into the store with sparkling eyes and hopeful voices, Ethan remained unnoticed. Shoppers hurried past him without so much as a glance. Some may have seen him, but no one stopped. He was used to that until someone did. A woman, mid-30s, walked briskly down the sidewalk. She wore a tailored red coat, her black gloves clutching a leather handbag. Her heels clicked sharply on the pavement, a contrast to the muffled sound of winter. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just moving like most people in the city. But as she passed the toy store, her stride slowed. Something caught her attention. It wasn't the display. It was the boy. She stopped. For a moment, she said nothing, just observed. The boy hadn't noticed her. His gaze remained fixed on the toy train, his small hands flat against the glass, eyes glazed with sorrow no child should wear. Her brows furrowed slightly, the kind of expression that forms when something strikes the heart before the mind can make sense of it. She watched him longer than she realized. Then, without a word, she stepped into the store. The bell above the door jingled sharply, and the warmth inside embraced her immediately. But even in the coziness of the toy store, her thoughts remained outside, where a little boy stood frozen not just by weather, but by something deeper, something she could not yet name. The woman moved past the stuffed animals, past the rows of puzzles and books, and toward the back, where the electric trains were displayed. Her fingers brushed a familiar model, red engine, silver trim, the same one looping in the window. The store clerk greeted her, assuming she was shopping for someone. She nodded, distracted. Her eyes flicked toward the front of the store again. Outside, Ethan still hadn't moved. The woman, Claire, didn't know what compelled her to turn back to the window. She didn't understand why. Of all the faces in the city, this one mattered. But there was something about the boy, something in the way he watched the train not with desire, but with mourning. She returned to the entrance and opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Ethan looked up. Their eyes met for the first time. He flinched slightly, as if caught in a place he wasn't supposed to be. But Claire didn't speak. She just stood in the doorway, letting the moment stretch. There was no invitation in her words, because she hadn't offered any, just presence, and that was somehow louder than anything else. Ethan didn't move, but he didn't run either. Claire gave one last glance and, without another word, disappeared back inside the toy store. The wind picked up. Ethan wiped his cheek with a coat sleeve, smearing a tear he hadn't noticed fall. The train in the window looped once more. Something had shifted. He didn't know what it was yet, but neither did she. Claire didn't usually act on impulse. Her world revolved around deadlines, client meetings, meticulously planned campaigns, and curated spontaneity designed to look effortless. But that boy, Ethan, had struck something deep in her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even maternal instinct, at least not in the way she understood it. It was more like a quiet recognition, the kind that makes your chest tighten without understanding why. She lingered near the counter longer than necessary, her hand brushing the small train set as the shopkeeper boxed it up without needing a verbal confirmation. "You picked a good one," the clerk said. "Popular this season." Claire barely nodded, reaching into her purse. As she handed over her card, she glanced once more at the door, half expecting the boy to have vanished, to have been nothing more than a flicker in the winter haze. But he was still there, only now not as frozen. He had moved slightly from the window, his body turned toward the store entrance, his expression unreadable. She took the bag in one hand and walked back to the door. As she opened it, the bell above rang again, and she looked directly at him. "Would you like to come in?" Her voice was calm, measured. No coaxing, no false warmth. Just an offer, made as plainly as one might suggest crossing the street. Ethan looked at her, then at the ground. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but he nodded almost imperceptibly and stepped inside. The warmth hit him like a wave. His body reacted before his mind did. His shoulders relaxed slightly. His arms hung a little looser at his sides. The smell of fresh wood, rubber tires, and new plastic filled the space. His eyes scanned the rows of toys, not with excitement but caution, as if unsure whether he was allowed to look, let alone touch. Claire said nothing at first. She watched him move slowly through the aisles, pausing occasionally at shelves of model cars and action figures, but always circling back to the trains. The store clerk gave her a curious look, but said nothing. This wasn't a child throwing tantrums or grabbing at everything within reach. Ethan was quiet, deliberate, almost reverent. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "I already bought the one in the window," she said, holding out the bag. "It's yours." Ethan didn't reach for it. He stared at the bag, then at her face. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. The silence that followed was heavy, not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken rules, things not easily named. "I can't," he said finally, his voice barely more than a whisper. Claire tilted her head. "Why not?" He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the hem of his coat. Then, slowly, he answered, eyes not meeting hers. "My dad said, you don't take things from strangers, not unless you can give something back." The way he said it wasn't defiant. It was honest, a statement of belief so deeply ingrained that no amount of warmth or kindness could override it. Claire felt something catch in her chest. She crouched down to meet his eye level, setting the bag gently on the floor between them. "Your dad was right to teach you that," she said carefully. "But sometimes a stranger might just want to make your day a little better. Not because they expect anything, just because they can." Ethan didn't respond. His eyes flicked toward the bag, then away again. Claire stood, understanding that pushing further would only close him off. She reached into her coat pocket for a business card, intending to leave it with him or the shelter, when Ethan suddenly pulled something from his own pocket, a crumpled piece of paper, worn from folding and unfolding. He handed it to her without a word. Claire unfolded it slowly. There was only a name written, in a child's uneven scrawl, Daniel Foster. Her breath caught. The room around her seemed to shrink, the background noise of the store fading to a low hum. She stared at the name, unable to blink, unable to speak. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded the paper back along the creases and looked down at Ethan. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice low. "He was my dad," Ethan said simply. "Do you know him?" Claire couldn't answer right away. Her mind had sprinted back more than a decade, to laughter on sunlit rooftops, to vinyl records spinning softly in old apartments, to late-night phone calls that stretched until morning. Daniel had been more than a chapter in her life. He had been a turning point, and then he had disappeared. She nodded slowly, the motion barely perceptible. Yes, a long time ago. Ethan seemed to shrink at that, as if the mention of the past carried with it a weight he wasn't sure how to carry. Claire stood still for a moment, torn between disbelief and something else she hadn't felt in years, grief. Daniel, a name she hadn't said aloud in so long it felt foreign on her tongue. He had vanished from her life without explanation. One moment, they were talking about moving in together. The next, he was gone. She had tried to find him for a while, called old friends, sent unanswered messages. Then eventually, she had moved on, at least externally. Internally, the loss had calcified into something sharp and silent. She looked back at Ethan. Now the boy had a different shape in her mind. Not just a face in a window. He was the son of someone she had once loved. And the pieces began to arrange themselves. The last name, the eyes, the stubborn quiet. Ethan, she said slowly, I knew your father. He was important to me. He didn't say anything, just looked away, jaw clenched. Claire felt the floor shift beneath her. The bag with the train still rested between them, but now it felt irrelevant. The toy was never what mattered. It was just a symbol of something missing, something lost, and now maybe something found. She walked with him to the door, neither speaking. When they stepped outside, the cold returned, biting and real. She handed him the paper again, but this time held his hand a second longer. Where do you stay? He looked up at her, guarded but no longer closed. There's a place on 149th, he said. Group home, St. Francis. Claire nodded. Would it be all right if I visited? Ethan didn't answer right away, but as he turned to walk back toward the subway entrance, his voice drifted back to her. I guess, if you want. He didn't look back. Claire stood on the sidewalk, the toy bag still in her hand, her mind spiraling into places it hadn't dared enter in years. Daniel, a child, a name on crumpled paper that felt like a door left open after all this time. And now, she had a reason to walk through it. Claire had always believed that the past was best left where it belonged. Memories, she told herself, were fragile things, too easily distorted by time or emotion. But that belief crumbled the moment she saw Daniel Foster's name in Ethan's handwriting. Something about the way the letters slanted, the faint crease in the paper from constant unfolding. It wasn't just a name. It was a thread pulling her backward through everything she thought she had moved beyond. She spent the next day in a haze, unable to focus on the briefings and emails that flooded her inbox. Her office view of the East River, once calming, now felt hollow. Every plan she had made for the weekend dissolved beneath the weight of one impossible fact. Daniel had a son who now stood in front of her, like a living question she couldn't answer. Unable to contain the growing storm inside her, Claire made a decision. She cleared her schedule, rescheduled meetings with vague excuses, and took the subway up to the Bronx. The St. Francis group home wasn't easy to find. The building was old, a relic of better funding decades ago, with bricks that had long since lost their sheen and windows layered with dust and condensation. The receptionist, a woman with deep lines around her eyes and a voice dulled by routine, looked up when Claire stepped inside. Can I help you? I'm here to see a boy, Claire said, aware of how strange that sounded. Ethan Foster. The woman narrowed her eyes slightly. You a relative? Claire hesitated. No, just a friend. I met him yesterday. The woman didn't smile, but she didn't object either. After a pause, she stood and gestured toward a hallway. You can wait in the common room. I'll let him know. Claire sat on a hard couch beneath a poster that read, You are stronger than you think, in faded letters. The room smelled of cleaning fluid and something older, something tired. Children's voices echoed from somewhere down the hall, mingling with the occasional sound of a door creaking shut or a television blaring too loudly. She waited for several minutes before Ethan appeared in the doorway, his hands buried in the sleeves of a hoodie that was at least 2 sizes too big. You came, He said, not quite surprised, but not neutral either. I said I would. He nodded and stepped into the room. They sat opposite each other for a moment, neither speaking. Claire studied him, his small, guarded posture, the way he avoided her eyes but kept glancing toward her shoes, her coat, the envelope in her hands. I wanted to show you something, she said, holding it out. I found this after we talked. Ethan didn't move at first, but eventually took the envelope. He opened it slowly, pulling out a faded photograph. In it, Daniel stood laughing beside Claire on a rooftop bathed in the golden light of sunset. They looked young, unburdened. Claire in a denim jacket, Daniel in a black t-shirt, his arm around her shoulders. That's your dad, she said quietly. And me, a long time ago. Ethan's eyes locked on the photo, his fingers pressing gently against its corners as though afraid it might dissolve. His expression didn't change, but something softened in his posture. He talked about you sometimes, he murmured. Claire leaned forward. Did he? Yeah, not a lot. But when he did, it was like he missed something he couldn't get back. Claire swallowed, her throat tight. He left without saying goodbye. I didn't know why. He said people always left first before they got left. The words stung more than they should have. Claire blinked, absorbing them. Daniel had always carried an invisible weight, a fear of abandonment rooted in a childhood he never fully unpacked. She had tried, once, to reach that part of him. But just when she thought she had, he vanished. I didn't leave him, she said. Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he pulled something else from his hoodie, a stack of yellowed pages folded neatly together. He handed them to her. They gave me these after he died. Letters. I couldn't read them all. It's like, if I read them, then it means he's really gone. Claire took the stack and unfolded the top page. The handwriting was unmistakably Daniel's, loopy, inconsistent, full of cross-outs and sideline notes. The first letter was dated 2 years before his death. Ethan, I don't know when you'll read this. Maybe not for a long time, but I hope you do. I hope this finds you when you need it the most. Claire's hands trembled. She flipped through the pages quickly. There were at least a dozen letters, some short, others sprawling, all addressed to Ethan. None of them had reached him until now. She looked up. Where were these? Ethan shrugged. Different homes, different people. I think some got lost. Some just didn't care enough. Claire's anger was quiet but fierce. The idea of Daniel's words, his connection to his son, being kept from him felt like a crime no one would ever answer for. I don't think he ever stopped loving you, Claire said. Not for a second. He never talked about dying, Ethan said. He just went out to get groceries and didn't come back. Claire closed her eyes. The ache of unfinished stories pressed against her chest. Do you have anyone else? She asked after a long pause. Ethan shook his head. I used to. Kind of. But no one sticks. She looked down at the photo again. The way Daniel had smiled at her. The way she had leaned into him. There was still something alive in that moment. Something unfinished. I want to do something, she said, reaching back into her coat for a new envelope. This one wasn't sentimental. It was legal. These are papers. Temporary guardianship. It means you could stay with me for a while. Just until we figure things out. Ethan stiffened instantly, pulling back like he'd been struck. His face twisted, not with fear, but with something older, something bitter. No. Claire froze. Ethan, you don't get to show up and just decide that. You think a train and some letters fix everything. His voice was rising now, louder than she had ever heard it. You don't even know me. I want to, Claire said gently. Well, I don't want you to. He stood, fists clenched, breathing hard. Claire reached for him, but he took a step back. I'm not a project. I'm not something broken you get to fix because you feel bad. My dad didn't trust people like that. Claire's heart dropped. The truth in his words left no room for argument. She couldn't explain away his pain. She couldn't ask him to understand her motives. All she could do was stand there as he turned and walked out of the room, the letters still clutched in his hand. She remained seated, the guardianship papers untouched on the table beside her. A door slammed somewhere in the building. And Claire knew she had lost something before she had ever had the chance to find it. The next 2 days passed in silence, so thick it seemed to echo. Claire had returned to her apartment in Midtown, a space that had always felt like a sanctuary, but now resembled a museum of detachment. Everything was in its place. The framed modern art above the fireplace, the clean white counters, the subtle scent of lavender air freshener. But nothing felt right. Her thoughts circled around Ethan like a restless tide. She kept replaying the moment he had pushed the envelope away, the sharp crack in his voice, the bitterness in his refusal. It hadn't been about the paperwork. She knew that. It had been about trust, about history, about a life that had taught him to question every act of kindness as a prelude to loss. Claire hadn't gone back to work. Instead, she spent hours searching. She read everything she could about the foster system in the Bronx, about guardianship laws in the state of New York, about trauma bonding and childhood grief. But information wasn't what she needed. It wasn't a lack of knowledge that had made Ethan walk away. It was something deeper and far more elusive, and it gnawed at her relentlessly. On the third morning, a call came from St. Francis. "Miss Claire?" She recognized the receptionist's voice immediately. The same clipped tone, but this time laced with concern. "Ethan's gone," the woman said. "He left sometime during the night. No signs of forced entry, but his bed was untouched. We've contacted the authorities, but given his age, well, you know how these things go." Claire didn't wait to respond. She threw on a coat, grabbed her keys, and left the apartment without bothering to lock the door. By the time she reached the group home, the police were already there. 2 officers taking statements, 1 interviewing a staff member. The other stood with clipboards, already preparing to mark Ethan as another runaway. Claire's presence was barely acknowledged. No one questioned her when she wandered past the front desk and into the boys' dormitory. Ethan's bed was the last in a row of 6. It was neatly made, as if no one had ever slept there. A worn paperback rested on the pillow, The Railway Children. Claire picked it up and opened to the middle. Between pages 72 and 73, she found another letter, one that hadn't been with the others. It was addressed to no one. "Sometimes I think if I just keep walking, maybe I'll get somewhere that doesn't remind me of anything." The handwriting was Ethan's. Claire closed the book slowly. The words weren't just a child's attempt to process pain. They were a declaration. He had left not to be found, but to escape the cycle he had come to expect: connection, then disappointment, trust, then abandonment. She stepped back into the hallway and caught the eye of the director, a tired man in his 60s with a voice like gravel. "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" she asked. The man scratched his beard. "No family, no close friends here. But there's a place some of the older kids talk about. An old station down by the river. Used to be part of the freight line. Abandoned now. Sometimes they go there to be alone." Claire didn't hesitate. She turned and left, ignoring the protests of the staff and the officers. Her car was still warm from the drive. As she headed south, the city seemed to blur around her. The buildings grew older, the streets rougher, and by the time she reached the edge of the industrial district, she felt as if she had stepped into a different decade. The station was a crumbling skeleton of brick and steel, its signage rusted beyond recognition. Vines had overrun the tracks, and shattered glass crunched beneath her boots as she stepped onto the platform. The sky hung low, thick with gray clouds that threatened snow. It was the kind of place a person could vanish into and never be found. She walked slowly along the tracks, calling his name softly. No answer, only the wind whistling through broken windows and the distant hum of traffic from a nearby overpass. Then she saw him. Ethan sat on the edge of the platform, legs dangling over the side, eyes fixed on the rails below. He didn't look up as she approached. His hoodie was pulled over his head, and his backpack rested beside him. Claire stopped a few feet away and didn't say anything at first. She could feel the tension in the air, taut as a piano wire. One wrong word, and he'd vanish again. "You found the letter," he said without turning. "I did." A pause. "You shouldn't have come." "I know." He shifted slightly, his fingers tapping the edge of the platform. "I thought maybe this place would be empty, but it's just another place." Claire stepped closer, carefully. Your father used to bring me here, she said, back when the station still had trains. That made Ethan turn. His eyes were narrowed, skeptical. Really, he said it was a good place to dream. Said the noise of the world couldn't reach us here. Ethan looked away again. He said stuff like that. Claire sat down beside him. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't hostile, just fragile. I didn't come to take you back, she said. I came to tell you something. He didn't move. Your father wrote more than letters. After he left, I tried to find him. I never knew why he disappeared. I thought maybe I'd done something. Maybe he was just tired of me. But a few months ago, I went through some old boxes, found a notebook he left. In it, he wrote something that broke me. She reached into her coat and pulled out a photocopied page. Ethan took it slowly. If anything ever happens to me, Claire is the only person I trust with my son. She's the only one who ever really saw me. Maybe she'll see him too. The paper trembled in his hands. I didn't know he wrote that, he whispered. I didn't either. Not until after I met you. He folded the page carefully and tucked it into his backpack. You still want me to live with you? Claire nodded. Yes, but not because I feel bad. Not because I pity you. Because you matter. Because I knew your father and I see you now. And I want to know you more. Ethan's face tightened. His lips trembled slightly. I don't want to be someone's obligation. You wouldn't be. He didn't answer, not right away. But then, slowly, he leaned sideways until his shoulder brushed hers. It was the first touch he had initiated. A small, silent gesture. But it said more than words ever could. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the distant rustle of wind through the broken beams above, surrounded by silence and steel and memory. And when Claire finally stood and reached out her hand, Ethan took it, not because he had to, because he chose to. The return to Claire's apartment was quiet, not tense but contemplative. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, watching the city blur past a window, his hands folded tightly in his lap. The streets grew familiar again, the snow now only a dull smear along curbs and rooftops. There was no ceremony to his arrival, no welcome banner, no room tour, just a soften from the heater, the quiet tick of the hallway clock, and the low light filtering through tall windows that stretched over the skyline. Claire showed him where the towels were, pointed to the spare bedroom, and told him gently that he could unpack whenever he felt ready. He nodded, his bag clutched to his chest like a shield. That first night, he didn't say much. He ate dinner silently, mechanically, chewing slowly and nodding when asked if he wanted more. Claire didn't press. She cleared the dishes without comment, and when he disappeared into the guest room, she stood in the kitchen for a long while, staring out the window at the dark Manhattan skyline. She didn't expect miracles, just time. In the days that followed, a subtle rhythm began to form. Ethan was still cautious, his movements careful, as if the walls might collapse if he leaned too hard against them. But there were small signs of comfort. He started choosing what cereal he wanted in the morning. He asked if he could use the laptop to play a game. He sat beside Claire on the sofa one evening while she scrolled through old photos, pausing at one of Daniel in Central Park holding a cup of coffee, his hair wind-blown, his expression soft and worn. He looks older in that one, Ethan said suddenly. Claire looked at him, surprised to hear his voice. He was, she replied. It was the last time I saw him. I never got to ask why he left. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Then, barely audible, he muttered, maybe he thought he was protecting you. Claire's throat tightened. From what? From him. The boy didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. But the statement lingered in the room, as though Daniel himself had whispered from someplace just out of reach. That weekend, Claire took Ethan to the public library. She had noticed the way his eyes flicked across the shelves in her apartment, his fingers tracing book spines without pulling them down. The library was quiet, warm, filled with soft carpet and wide chairs. She left him to wander. When she returned 20 minutes later, she found him seated at a table with a stack of books about locomotives and early American railroads. Trains again, she teased gently. They make sense, he said without looking up. There's always a destination, even when they go in circles. That night, she ordered a used bookshelf online. When it arrived, she let him assemble it himself, sitting nearby in case he needed help. He didn't. It took him almost an hour, his brows furrowed, his focus intense. But when it stood upright, a little crooked but sturdy, he nodded once, satisfied. They placed the books together, and Claire found herself memorizing the way he arranged them, alphabetically by author for fiction, by subject for everything else. There was logic in his order, a system, a need to control something in a world that had offered so little structure. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after he'd moved in, she found him sitting on the floor of his room. The box of letters from Daniel lay open beside him. He was reading them again, slowly, methodically, his lips moving as he followed each line. Claire leaned on the doorway, watching in silence until he noticed her presence. He said he wanted to take me to California. Ethan said he was saving for a trip, wanted to show me the Pacific Ocean. Claire stepped inside and sat beside him. He told me once that he never saw the ocean himself. I wonder if he was lying. Why would he? Because people lie when they're scared, Ethan said flatly. She didn't answer. The boy had grown up around promises made and broken. Even Daniel, for all his love, had left too many questions behind. But then Ethan pulled something from the bottom of the box. It was a small object wrapped in a cloth. He unrolled it and revealed a tiny metal train engine, no longer than the length of a pen. Its paint was chipped, the wheels stiff from time, but it had been cared for. He held it in his palm like a relic. He gave me this the night before the accident, he said. Said it was his lucky thing. I didn't believe in luck then. Do you now? Ethan looked at her. No, but maybe I believe in choices. Claire offered a quiet smile. And what do you choose? The question hovered between them. Ethan stared at the toy train, then at the letters, then around the room. His room, a place filled with his things now, with shelves, books, quiet, a place where he was seen. I think I choose to stay, he said at last. For now. Claire didn't cry. She had done enough of that in private, but her voice, when she responded, cracked under the weight of relief. Then that's enough. They hugged that night, not carefully, not reluctantly, but fully, arms wrapped tight, breaths held, the kind of embrace that erodes walls. It was not a promise of forever, just a beginning. Several weeks later, a soft snow fell again over the city. It was the kind that danced rather than blanketed. In his room, Ethan stood by the window, watching the flakes spiral, the muffled sounds of the street below softened by the double-pane glass. Behind him, on a shelf Claire had helped mount above his desk, the electric train set circled slowly, its rhythm steady, its light flickering across his books. He watched it run, not with longing, but with something gentler. The train didn't represent what he had lost anymore. It didn't mock him with the idea of what he couldn't have. It was simply his, a part of his space, his world, a symbol, not of what had broken, but of what had been rebuilt. Down the hall, Claire was on a call, her voice half laughing, half frustrated, as she negotiated a new marketing campaign. He could hear her, a soft presence in the apartment, busy, real, imperfect. And Ethan, 9 years old, orphaned, quiet, watchful, no longer invisible, no longer uncertain, reached forward and gently stopped the train with one finger. It clicked once, rested. He exhaled. He didn't need it to keep going in circles anymore. He was home,